comes to biblical issues and practices, sometimes emotion can blur the line between what we experience and what's actually in the Bible. Perhaps none more emotionally charged is the issue of speaking in tongues. Anyone who has witnessed someone doing what we call speaking in tongues or has done it themselves knows that the vast majority of time, the person speaking does not know what they are saying, and no one listening knows what's being said either. In Acts 2, the believers were gathered together, most likely in the temple courts, to celebrate the Torah festival of Shavuot, also known as Pentecost. God poured out His Spirit and performed in them a miraculous sign. Specifically, God enabled them to speak with other tongues, as it says in Acts 2:4, "They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterance." But is the speaking of tongues that we see in churches today the same as what occurred in Bible times? To know for sure, we'll need to look a little closer. Firstly, the word tongues is simply another way of saying languages. So this should to some degree demystify the term. And as we examine Acts 2, we'll find that though the ability to speak in other languages that you had never previously been able to speak was certainly miraculous, all of the languages spoken were real human languages. In verse 6 it says, "And when this sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language." The crowd was astonished because they knew that most of the disciples were Galileans and obviously did not have the ability to speak in all of these different languages. In verses 7 to 11, Luke takes the time to describe all of the different languages being spoken, or at least the regions from which the languages came. So again, the languages were real human languages. There were people present who could understand what was being said, and the actual act of listening and understanding was completely natural. And there's no indication that the believers were able to continue to speak in different languages at their whim. Instead, it makes more sense to understand that this event was a sign from God, that He was empowering the believers to spread the gospel throughout the whole world. Additionally, notice that the ability to speak in different languages was not the motivating factor for why the 3,000 people placed their faith in Jesus. Rather, it was the message that Peter preached, which he spoke in the common language. The ability to speak in different languages was merely the sign that intrigued and gathered the crowd. Tongues is only mentioned 2 other times in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 10 verses 44 to 48 and Acts chapter 19 verses 5 to 6. Both instances mirror what happened in Acts 2, and Luke gives no indication that the languages spoken were anything but real human languages. So there are only 3 times for sure in the book of Acts where tongues are even mentioned. Though it could have, we are given no indication that this phenomenon continued to occur. It would appear that people were only able to speak in different languages when God enabled them to do so. Apparently, the disciples could not willfully speak in tongues as they pleased. Also, the disciples never sought to speak in tongues. All 3 times showed that the phenomenon happened spontaneously as God willed. So, for the most part, the modern practice of speaking in tongues is not the same thing that happened in the book of Acts. Check out our next episode as we look at the only other book of the Bible that mentions tongues, 1 Corinthians. We'll look a little closer and see if perhaps there we'll find justification for modern day speaking in tongues.